Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. I came across this story on the BBC recently, and you see it repeated in a million different guises in this day and age. This one states reports of OCD among under 25s triple in 10 years. Now, don't think I'm trying to mock anybody who suffers with these things. I'm very much not. I understand these are real problems that people face. But like I say, they come in many different guises. A big one, of course, is men need to talk about their feelings. I'm sure there are some serious problems people have in there. But all too often I think this is playing back into an ideology of modernity very subtly. It comes to you as help, but no one seems to ask why. Why is everybody seemingly a bit mad these days? Are they suffering so much? We're supposed to live in free, rational, humanistic modernity, free of all of the make-believe nonsense of religion. In the hyper-scientific age where we have everything we could need materially. And it seems with every passing year there's a new disorder that's been found, and the line supposedly is that, we're modernising because we've discovered this. But I sometimes wonder, have we really discovered it? Or is there something else at play going on? Are we just giving labels to a more fundamental human challenge that's been there since the beginning of time? Could it be that man is supposed to face the challenges he has within, to overcome, to move into new spiritual ground so his roots can grasp a new soil? And in modernity, he's not doing that. He's living a relatively mundane life, most of it in front of screens. That's just not happening in the West. Here, the World Health Organization states over 1 billion people living with mental health conditions now. We're also seeing a explosion in addiction in all manner of arenas: gambling addiction, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, sex addiction. These things are seemingly limitless, but again, is it really that we're finally recognizing addiction as a problem? Or is it that human beings are seeking answers? They're seeking meaning in things that just can't really provide what they want? Is it maybe that they want to try and find completion but have nowhere else to find it, so go back into a world of worldly things which feels good in the short term but leads them down the garden path in the long run? I also saw this on the BBC the other day. Skip short strolls. A longer daily walk is better for your heart, says study. And I couldn't help but chuckle when I saw this, because you wonder, why does anybody need to be told to go for a walk? I mean, it's just intuition, isn't it? That being outside, walking, moving your body is good for you. But there's something so odd about why on earth this is news. But of course, this speaks to this scientific obsession of the age. What do the experts say with their test tubes and their data sets? You really should know this by yourself, and that we don't sort of symbolises a sense of detachment, I think, with just an innate wisdom that we have as human beings. That wisdom is there, by the way, in us, just as it's in every being. I mean, you think about that famous story of, you take a pigeon, and I think this was on the BBC years ago, I remember, and they drove it out to some country location away from the city it was, and drove round a roundabout and all this stuff 100 times to confuse the poor pigeon, who couldn't see anything, obviously. And then they let the pigeon go, and it just flew straight back home. And the point is that the pigeon just had an inner knowing. In their spiritual language, again, that would just be alignment, you'd call something like that. But we're so detached, from our own wisdom within. I'm not saying that we would be able to magnetically find our way home like a pigeon, but we as human beings have a way of being, like all animals have a way of being. But we seem to be so detached from that in this day and age. We're lost in technicality and the mind, which is why I think we're something of a therapized society now. If someone has a problem, the only thing you can really do is go and talk it out to a therapist who, to be fair, normally votes for Jeremy Corbyn and thinks you should too. So I've always been a bit wary of therapy. I'm not saying it can't help, but one, it's very feminine in its approach, and two, it only goes to one level. Of course, this is why people spend just years upon years upon years in therapy and don't really improve. I'm not saying that's the case for everyone. I'm sure there are examples where it's not like that. But a lot of the time, people don't really seem to get better. They're just going further and further into the chaos of their mind. I think this could come back to really a formative thinker of modernity and Freud. And there's something fundamental about Freud. I think he did a lot of damage personally. I'm not saying all of his ideas are bad, but I think the underlying idea of his work is something like the true reality of life is the unconscious. And not only that, it's chaotic with it. Now, what's the implication there? Well, the implication is, well, yeah, in our day-to-day life, we might have rational thought and order and so on. But what's beneath that, the true reality of things, is completely chaotic, it's random. Now, if that isn't a recipe for neuroticism, I don't know what is. But in many ways, that's just the way the Western mind is completely composed now. We're lost in the idea of the little self, and beneath that is just a bundle of confusion. You could argue that Jung built on Freud's work and helped us a little bit with adding some structure in there, archetypes and so on, which I think does help us. And of course, Jung also did point to the greater realities of life. I think Jung is a lot more of a powerful figure than Freud for me and a lot more helpful. But in many ways, it's still nebulous because what's beneath the archetypes, it gets very vague again there. And in many senses, we just return to the chaos that Freud put forth. And in fact, you could even probably chart this back even more, even to a figure like Nietzsche, say. Nietzsche, who famously said God is dead, and, I remember at university, many atheists loved that. Ha ha ha, aren't we clever atheists? I don't think that's quite what Nietzsche was saying. I think it was something more like human beings up to this point had the notion, or at least pointed to, the transcendent. That was the true order of life, if you will. But now Western man has turned away from that. He's turned to rationality, the mind, science, if you will. And that's going to hack at the very roots of the transcendent order, which once gave the West its structure. And we're going to have to go beyond, if you like, our structures now to create the new man, the Übermensch, and so on. Now, again, you could say Freud is getting even further than Jung in many ways, this idea of recognizing the limitations of modernity, and then in some senses promoting this idea of the will to power, the overcoming, becoming the overman, beyond good and evil, I think his great work was called, and it's very much oriented around that. But you could say again, the problem is with Nietzsche is it's very classically Western, and ironically all too human. I say ironically because one of his books was called All Too Human. But the idea is that in the will to power, it's still the human overcoming and becoming the new figure, if you will. We're still not really harking back to the sacred order which once gave us structure in the world. Now, I'm saying all of this because obviously I think it all comes together in the existentialist angst that modern man feels. Nietzsche really set that up, and in many senses, we try to overcome that via our own will, but I don't think we truly can. And this is why I've been experiencing a lot in recent years in my own life, and I've seen it with other men too, that there is this turn back to spirituality. And you could say in some senses it's fragmented and broken, but I think the real reason many people are so interested in it is because it does offer this sense of the overcoming of the mind and the individual self. It almost recognizes a dimension beyond that allows you to let go, to realize that not everything is so tight and fraught. And when we're stuck in that energy, of course we're going to get lost in all manner of angers and lusts and pains and mental ailments because we don't have any escape, or essentially we're trapped in a cage of the mind. This is why I do really believe that the Western world has become increasingly meaningless. The day-to-day lives that we lead. How many of us stop and say, what are we doing all of this for? The only answer I've ever really been able to learn is, really it's for money, material possessions, which should supposedly make you feel good, or some sort of ideology. Leftist liberal ideology is obviously very popular at the moment in the mainstream. But then you realise, well, what about if, everything was just perfect? Would everybody just be happy? I don't think they would. Very often you realise in the modern era, people need something to grind against. They need the enemy. On one level of our consciousness, I think that's okay. But if we're really going to heal and grow, I think we need to be able to go on beyond that level. I think there'll always be problems and battles, if you like, on the physical plane. But the great truth of the traditions and the spiritual realities has always been beyond that duality into what's called non-duality, beyond the self, if you like, moving into what Christ calls the peace that passes all understanding. Now, I don't want to make this sound all dead simple, because for many of us, this could be a lifetime's work, recognising this truth. Some people, it comes with the click of the fingers. But for the vast, vast majority of us, it's something more about really shedding our skin and allowing ourselves to feel the great pain within. And instead of seeing these things as things to be worked through or suppressed or overcome, rather seeing them as teachers, I think, is probably a wiser way to see these things. What is it that's beneath the anxiety, the depression? What's it truly saying? If you go right to the heart of the pain, very often you'll find that there is deep answers. Of course, that's the great symbolic meaning of the cross, the great brutal ripping apart of the material level and the inner transcendence that comes through that. Christ, the God-man, overcomes the world of pain, and goes beyond, if you like, to his true nature, which is really pointing us all in that same direction. But again, I do sympathise with modern man, because who's there to tell us this? And even if we were to embark on this journey, what structures have we got? As I've said many times, you go to your local church, you're just going to get a lecture on BLM or why LGBTQ is great. And even if you're not going to get that stuff, it's just going to be quite soft and sweet. So in a way, we've lacked those structures, even that hierarchy of the elder to, if you like, take us to every next level. That said, I do believe that as things fall apart, we become more and more aware of these things. And there is a chance to rebuild some of these structures in a new tomorrow. This is obviously a big passion of mine and why I've constructed this course on traditionalism, which I should remind you is on pre-order at the moment. You get an early bird discount and you get double discount if you're a Substack subscriber. I'll put it in the link down below. Do get in before tomorrow, because it will go live tomorrow. But the idea of this is to try and offer modern man a route back to sacred order that's beyond what the modern world can offer. I'm not saying it immediately clicks your fingers and it's all answered. Again, that's another trick of modernity. It's not how the real world works. What it's really showing us is how a sacred order can take our pain and our struggle and our challenge and turn it into something meaningful that, again, might take 2 years, might take the whole of your lifetime. It's not about time. It's about recognition within. And as Nietzsche famously said in one of his more correct statements, he who has a why can bear any how. But this isn't even a human why. It's beyond a why, really. It's more a recognition of that inner compass taking us home. That requires a humility. We have to let go of thinking we know the right thing all the time and say to something higher than us, okay, there's a wisdom inside of me and I want you to pull me closer in that magnetic way. Of course, modern man doesn't like that because we're lost in our own selves. But I think as we break apart more and more, those answers can start to come. Anyhow, just a few thoughts from me on the malady modern man finds himself in. If you are interested in the course, do check it out down below. I'll also do the coaching again, probably in the new year now. I'm not sure if I'll have time in this year. If you're interested in that, do let me know. It'll be the group coaching. If you want individual coaching, you can always reach out to me. Other than that, do join the Substack as well. I'm going to make some big changes on that in the new year. I'm planning on it anyway, and I'd like to get your opinions on it when I have the next group call. Other than that, do take care of yourself, friends, and do stay on this sacred path. There really is deep wonder within us if we can just work through the wreckage and get close to that light.